Danny.
I should have said Dr. Blanchflower. I said Mr. and I should have said Dr.
There he is.
Blake, let me
there he
just
is.
Blake, I have 4. So I'm actually doctor.
Oh my God, quad doctor.
Quad.
Well, thanks for joining us today, sir. And I'm gonna leave you guys to it.
Of course.
All right.
All right, doctor. Welcome back. How are you?
I'm good, man. I want to show you a picture.
The fish you caught? All right, go ahead.
Oh, no. Can you see that picture?
Yeah.
Okay. This is the crucial picture for today. Would you like me to
My
talk
psychiatrist showed me these ink blot things.
Can you see the picture?
Yeah, we got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've been hearing about, the US soft landing, supposedly, says Chris Waller, and we hear today about Larry Summers talking about how we have to keep wage pressure down and we have to raise the unemployment rate. So this is the most important chart for listeners to this program to look at. So this is a random scatter of points, right?
Yes.
And if you look, there's the line that fits it is an upward sloping line. Well, that's the basis of Larry Summers and the Fed's view about wage growth. This is the US wage Phillips curve, which is supposed to slope down from left to right. And it actually doesn't. There is no evidence whatsoever since 1965 of a US wage Phillips curve. There is no evidence whatsoever that the unemployment rate impacts wage growth. That's it. So this is the longest series we have from 1965 of production and non-supervisory workers. So you simply plot it. You can get it from the BLS. All your listeners can just go to the BLS, you mess about a bit and you can get it, and then you can plot it against the unemployment rate. So here the first thing is that there is no relationship. There is no wage Phillips curve as asserted by all these central bankers and everybody else. So they try and do stuff and say, we need to go and think about something else. We'll mess with the horizontal axis. We'll mess with the vertical axis. But just so listeners understand, Phillips in 1958, in the most famous paper in economics, published in Economica, wrote about the wage changes and unemployment. So the Phillips curve is about this. So the problem that we have is that unemployment appears to be uncorrelated with wage growth over a long period. And also since 2008, it's uncorrelated with wages as well. And so all the arguments made in 2015 to 18 by the Fed, which is that unemployment's falling, wage growth is going to take off, turns out to be entirely wrong, because unemployment was uncorrelated with wage growth. And exactly what happened, as the unemployment rate fell, wage growth didn't take up. So here we have a big problem that you shouldn't use the unemployment rate for an indicator of much of anything. And I'm going to start this off. I think the idea that the US is going to go to a soft landing is for the birds.
Well, Danny, you said we were in recession last time we talked, which was 3 months ago. All your data was pointing that your happiness index was turning down even before that. So it's they're sealing the deal with rate hikes.
I think that's right. And I think the places that particularly the UK now looks an interesting place, not least for the very first time in many, really lots of decades. There's a large national strike going on in Britain today of the workers on the railways. And there appears to be quite a lot of support in the public. The government's trying to say these are all a bunch of loony, left-wing, militant union people. But actually, you certainly wouldn't argue over the last 25 years that much of anything in the economy at all has been determined by overly powerful unions or by workers getting major wage growth. So we have an issue here, which is that we can argue about whether a wage price spiral is coming or whatever. But what's happened is that inflation has risen. The governments around the globe certainly the UK and the US, have been pushing very tight monetary fiscal policy in Britain, highest tax rates in Britain for 40 years. The central bank raising rates, and with dissenters are really about raising it by more. And you have ludicrous speeches yesterday by Catherine Mann and others who really don't seem to understand about the data or the real world or the mistakes that they made in 2008. So I think it's very likely that we will see very strong data revisions coming, which suggests that, we're in recession, knowing that in 2008, if you look back, we didn't officially know that recession started in December 2007 until December 2008. It took the NBR a year to say that we were in recession. And in the UK, it really took until around July 2009 to actually know that recession started in April 08. So I think you have to be very cautious here, understand that data takes a while to come in, and oftentimes at recessions, revisions come, but we know when recessions hit that revisions actually are to the downside. So I think evidence on retail sales and other things are big. I think the evidence on timber prices, which are tumbling, microchips.
Yeah, I saw lumber back down at 500,
yeah,
which
exactly.
used to be high. That used to be high, and now
it went up and it went
bargain.
down. Yeah, it went back up again, but now it's plummeted again. Apparently, microchips, that's similarly, and the Baltic Dry again is much lower. The cost of freight shipping. So I don't know. I mean,
we're getting a crack in energy prices too in the last month.
I think so. I think that's right. I mean, I think in a sense, you sort of said it about what I'd said to you before with rather more certainty, I perhaps think, than I really meant it. I mean, I think my view in a sense is that there is a plausible counter argument to everything the hawks and the rate risers and the soft landing folks have been making. And the arguments I've made are at least as plausible. Well, if they're at least as plausible, then the degree of certainty that these people keep coming out with is really questionable. And I think the likelihood is, I mean, Larry Summers says you've got to get unemployment to 5%. Well, good luck with that. Unemployment's not the variable that matters. The variable that matters is the employment rate and the participation rate, which are already falling. So that's the number that matters. It turns out that just put it technically, if you look at wage equations, what actually matters in wage equations is actually the non-employment rate and underemployment. And the unemployment rate's sort of irrelevant. I mean, I'm a labor economist. I'm telling everybody here, the unemployment rate in the United States today is an irrelevant indicator of the labor market. It underestimates things. It doesn't enter wage equation. What you should look at is underemployment, where workers don't get enough hours, and you should look at people who have been forced out of the labor market. And maybe it's a choice in the sense that their reservation wages have risen. They see the value of work, underpaid work, not being good enough. My middle daughter was a teacher she has 3 children, and basically for her the cost of childcare was greater than the cost of working. The way the salary of teachers had risen, she'd be back at work. She chooses to stay home, and that's what we've seen in the United States. So the amount of slack in the labor market is high and growing already, and people such as Summers and all the central bankers and so on. I mean, I'm a professor of labor economics. I've worked on this stuff for 40 years now, and this stuff predicted 2008, and it predicts every one of the last 6 recessions, and nobody else has got anything, Dale. Nobody else has anything that predicts recession before it happens.
Okay.
And even when it does happen, you don't know it.
Do you know Lakshman Akutane?
Yeah.
Because I interviewed him several months ago, and he was, kind of in your camp. That the recession already, is beginning.
I mean, there are uncertainties in everything, right? And and in these prediction equations, it's pretty hard to do. The one thing. I mean, this is a plausible argument, and increasingly likely, I think, as you've talked about the oil prices coming down. It looks things like the availability of shipping containers and the supply side stuff is diminishing. But if that's true, then it makes, I mean, speeches and stuff that Chris Waller has been saying, trying to talk about the labor market. But if he was in my labor economics class, I'd have failed him. It was completely made up nonsense. Says on the basis of the relationship between the unemployment rate and the vacancy rate, we're going to have a soft landing. Well, very good. It's like, okay, well, it's equally plausible we're not. I mean, the arguments made no sense at all. I mean, I understand there's the gap between vacancies and the unemployment rate have risen, but what does that tell us? That doesn't enter into wage equations. The vacancies may or may not tell us anything, and it may be a vacancy for a brain surgeon in Seattle, and the available workers are in Miami who want to be gardeners. So the mismatch between occupation and region tell us nothing. There's no basis in labor economics for most of the stuff that these people have been saying. So that suggests to you error. That suggests to you macro error, Dale.
Or lying.
Good. Well,
good afternoon, Dr. Blanchflower. No. I've said it before. I don't know if you've heard the interview that Bernanke gave a few years after the crisis, and he was asked, like, how could you be so wrong about your hypothesis about the housing market imploding?
That it was contained,
and it was contained, and his answer was, because obviously he preferred to admit he was lying than to say he's incompetent. He's like, I was part of the Bush administration, which, by the way, kills any assumption that there is independence in central banks. So, what could I say?
Well, I mean, it's certainly true. Let me just broaden that a little bit. So I get my students to watch these 4 lectures that Bernanke gave at GW on the crisis. And you get to the end and I say to them, okay, so this was about a lack of regulation. It was about people being allowed to take out crazy loans. I said, who was responsible for setting the conditions in the nature of the loans? And they all sit there and they go, but the chairman of the Fed, exactly. So that was the first thing, but let's go a bit further. So I was on the MPC and I was sitting there when the Northern Rock failed, and there were thousands of people in the streets for the first time in over a century. And the reality was that, well, the governor of the Bank of England didn't think banks were interesting or relevant, and apparently had never sent anybody from the Bank of England to Northern Rock in the previous 2 years. So the failure of Northern Rock was a surprise to the Bank of England, as was Lloyd's and RBS, which nearly brought the global banking system down. So it was that they'd taken their eyes off the housing market. They'd also taken their eyes off the balance sheets of banks. And all of it was a surprise to them, because they thought inflation was all that mattered, and we could run economics as if it was a theory seminar at Chicago or the London School of Economics. So it was fundamental failure. It was a failure about understanding what the real world was. And then the last one, I remember coming into the Bank of England and listening to speeches by former and present members who said, yes, house prices are rising, and yes, the house price to earnings ratios have gone really, really high, but this time it's different. How'd that work out for you?
Yeah.
And of course, the reason in a way, Dale, is that if you're in a bubble, you have to think it's not a bubble or you wouldn't be in it, right? And so that was the reasoning. So what gives you faith? Go back to what Bernanke said. What gives you faith to believe that this time round, the people who failed have got it right? And I think the answer is, by default, you probably assume that they're wrong, and perhaps Blanchflower is right, as I was in 2008. I called it in April 2008 for much the same reasons. And now again.
Dr. Blanchflower, if I may ask a question, I'm with you in all your assumptions. I've been saying for quite some time as well that I believe that we're entering a recession. The question is, okay, let's say they assign you to be the Fed chairman tomorrow. How do you handle a situation that you have an over-indebted country to run the monetary policy for? You have extremely high inflation, and you're entering a recession. What would you do?
Well, it's obviously really, really complicated, and you've obviously got to get the Treasury Department and others to think about it. The first question I think you have to get to is you have to say. So let me go back. People ask me what I would have asked Powell at the last press conference, because everyone was asking,
that's a good one.
Is it going to go from 50 to 75? And I have 2 questions I would have asked people. I would have asked him. And the first question was, what evidence from the real world would it take for you to not raise rates? And then secondly, what evidence from the real world would it take for you to cut rates? So the first thing I'd be doing is I would actually be trying to watch the data, and I would take off the table the idea that we're going to raise rates further. I would say we don't know what's coming. The potential is that inflation would be potentially it's going to fall back, as we were already seeing. And we don't want to collapse the economy, because a collapse in the economy would be much worse. So I think obviously it's a great question that you've said, but I certainly think that having mortgage rates at 6% and the likelihood of a huge crash in the housing market coming, out of the labor force coming, wage growth declining, I mean, just chaos coming. So I would sort of take off the table that we know what we're doing. I would say these are very complicated times. We don't know still the path of the virus, which is emerged. It's still back up at 100,000 a day. We don't know what's going to happen to China. We don't know what's going to happen in Europe. It looks probable that Europe and the UK are headed into recession. I would be much more cautious about policy and say, the fiscal policy perhaps can alleviate some of these costs by tax cuts and oil price help for people at the low end. Can I just say one other thing? So there's a great new paper that's coming out in the Journal of Money, Credit and Banking. It's built on work that I did before, and it shows you what the consequences of actual, if there is any kind of trade-off between inflation and unemployment, which may or may not be true. But anyway, what it shows is that all the central bankers keep telling you that inflation is the only thing that matters. This paper tells you exactly the opposite. It tells you that if you look at things like well-being, so you look at measure well-being, it says that a 1 percentage point rise in unemployment is 6 times worse than a 1 percentage point rise in inflation in happiness terms. But if you look at pain, sadness, any of these kinds of variables, it's about 12 times worse. So the danger is that you put into a situation a policy to reduce and take away inflation that's not your fault by creating a huge recession that hurts people much more. So the answer to your question is I would be much more cautious about what I know. I'd be much more cautious about what the data looks like. And I would certainly be much more cautious about saying we'll raise rates, because in all probability, the next move that I would be looking at would probably be to have a cut.
Yes, but my question here is, by your admission,
question, man. It's a tough question.
I know, but by your admission, there are bubbles in the global economy, and I totally agree with you. So unless you let the system reset, which where we've taken things probably requires a depression, how do you let all the malinvestments, fix themselves?
I mean, what are you going to do? You say, I'm going to bring the zombies down. My view has always been, you try and bring the zombies down. A, we don't know who the zombies are, and B, we bring down the non-zombies too. I don't know. This is a tough one. I mean, it's a reset of the whole financial system. Pretty hard one to answer.
Danny, any comment on what the IMF is going to do with the SDR in July? I've just become aware of it. That
so what
does it matter?
Well, it probably does matter in the sense that the IMF got it wrong in 2008, and then went to a serious mea culpa, saying that we got it wrong. So I mean, yeah, the issue I think in place is that globally people are resetting. The IMF and the World Bank and everybody else is resetting their forecast downwards. I mean, look at the most recent World Bank forecast. So I think in a sense that the IMF, if it learned anything from 2008, is that it's going to have to be more supportive than it was in the past, because what we've got here, but as they said, is a global crisis, baby. I mean, we do. And if you go back to the thing I've talked to you often about, which is consumer confidence. I mean, I've had lots of students working on this. If you look at consumer confidence, the collapse in it, it's exactly the same in every European country, in the UK, in the United States, in Canada, and in Japan. And the reason we've got a global crisis is we've got issues of global food prices, global oil prices, and a global pandemic. So I think the IMF is going to be, and the World Bank is going to be crucial here. What do they do? Do they try and, are they trying to be supportive, or are they going to tighten? And this is back to our earlier conversation. I think we're in danger of a deep global recession. Then the question is how deep and how long lasting. And if you look in many of the data that I look at, it looks worse than 2008.
Wow.
I mean, I'm not saying it's true. But I'm saying, I'm saying
what you're seeing.
It's plausibly that. And a lot of the times, I think listeners to this program, when you listen to a Fed governor, you listen to a Fed bank president, you say the following thing to them. Okay, you've just argued that, but isn't the exact opposite equally plausible? You say things like, oh, the terminal rate of interest is 4. Well, is it plausible it's -4? Is it plausible it's 0? How do you know that? You're just guessing? And the answer is, well, I'm guessing. Okay, but oftentimes in these situations, we don't have any forecasting. I mean, go back to the question, what would I do? The answer is huge uncertainty. And if you listen to people, it's as if there isn't any uncertainty. You listen to Powell, oh, we've got to deal with inflation. We've got to raise this. We'll do 75 basis points here and 75 there. Oh,
after he had taken that off the table only 30 days early.
Well, Dale, he had good precedent. Remember at the Bank of England, the governor of the Bank of England said we're going to raise rates and then didn't. And then said, this is in the fall, and then said we're not going to raise rates and then did. Oh, okay. So why would you believe anything these people say? It looks like they're being pushed by the winds, politically being pushed by a government who says we have to control inflation, so you guys better do this. We want to argue there isn't going to be a recession, but sorry, White House, how do you know that? I don't know it. The Fed doesn't know it, and the fact that you get Chris Waller standing up and blurting complete nonsense about the fact that some relationship between two silly little variables that relate to nothing. He got 8 time series observations. Well, good luck with that. My response to the speeches that he's made is that you can draw a straight line between any 2 data points.
Yes, and a journalist friend said that who covers the Fed said he's never in his whole career. Every meeting is filled with such uncertainty because of policy shifting and I wouldn't go 75.
But Dale, that's right, but it's not really in the rhetoric, is it? I mean, what you said
it's in the actions.
Yeah, I mean, if in a sense the uncertainty is because of the world you and I are talking about, and others talk about on this program. But read Chris Waller's speech, read Catherine Mann's speech. It's like, okay, I took this little tiddly macro model that people wrote about in 1993, and I look at this and I say, I'll change that and I'll change that a little bit, and I'll write down this equation, and the answer is soft landing. Yeah. Well, okay, fine. I mean, the economics of twiddling. I mean, it's the amount of uncertainty in the world. It seems to me the way you have to do it.
That's the bull market, is in uncertainty.
Yes.
And also, Danny, everyone is using the word unprecedented for everything. Right. And it's unprecedented how many times I've heard unprecedented in the last 3 months.
So how the hell do you know what's going on? So the story I like, Dale, is the following. If I was sitting as Fed chairman, I would have the staff do something like this. There are 4 plausible scenarios that we could go into in the next couple of years, and here they are. Inflation tumbles, and we actually we have a pretty soft landing. Second, inflation doesn't tumble, we don't have a soft landing. Number 3, there's another wave of, and you go through each of these scenarios and you say, in this scenario, if this happened, this is what we would have to do. We'd have to raise rates. We'd have to create a big recession. Here's what we would do in scenario 2 and in scenario 3 and scenario 4. And then at the press conference, you say, well, Chairman, whoever it is, Smith, which one of these do you think is going to happen? You say, I have no idea. It's unprecedented. I don't know. And the danger is we haven't had policymakers saying the great word that you just said. It's unprecedented, and I don't know what's coming. And if you listen to the debate and you read the minutes from the FOMC meeting, read the minutes from the MPC meeting, and I read them and I think, you're out of your minds. You don't know that. You're just making this up. I mean, the Bank of England was amazing.
Is it the role they play to project confidence even when they don't know? Is it a little bit of their Hollywood face? Huh?
I don't know that. I mean, a good example, I don't know it. I mean, it's just you don't want to, they say stuff which you and I don't believe. I just don't believe it. I mean, the lovely thing on the MPC last week was that so that the minutes come out on Thursday and they announce their decision and they say things like, oh, the labor market's looking fine. But the day before, so 24 hours before they print their decision, the unemployment rate went up. So the day they print it, they've missed the fact that it went up the day before, but they haven't spotted it. So ex ante and ex post, they're wrong. They say it doesn't look like the labor market's loosening. Well, okay, so why would I believe a word you said when a day before you published your decision, it showed that what you said in your decision was wrong? Surely, if you're going to publish the thing on Thursday morning, you might have taken out what happened the day before. So I just think they're resorting to theory. They're resorting to thinking about what happened in 1970 when union power had risen. We hadn't actually at that time had a global pandemic. How can you say that some little back of the envelope, silly little twiddly model tells you anything about a world with war, pandemic, global issues,
the confluence of all of these issues?
The confluence of all those issues, and also think about the behavioral changes that have come. Long COVID still exists in the society. That David Kotok is very concerned about its role. All of these people have withdrawn from the labor market, perhaps because their reservation of wage has risen. I mean, I think that's a big part of this story. People were working, they realized the value of their leisure was perhaps higher, as I said, than the value of work. So they've withdrawn, maybe just for now, because they think that the way to think of it is their reservation wage has risen. And so if you start to cut reservation, you start to cut actual wages, all that's going to happen is people are going to leave the labor market, output's going to fall, you create the recession. And to argue that we raise rates so that we can cut rates when a recession comes is nonsense, because you caused the recession. But the uncertainty about the mechanism.
They caused a tightening too, to some degree, don't you think?
Absolutely. Of course, they talked, I mean, in a sense, the decisions, and when the Fed raises rates, it does nothing because the market's already priced in by their stupid talk that a rate rise is coming. So now you're in a position that if you don't deliver the rate rise, the market responds because they've assumed that you were going to do it because of the silly talk you made that people believed. And I certainly would not be in the position of trying to, listen or believe what they said. Oh, you can see my picture. That's my fish I caught last week.
So, I'm saying that with all the uncertainty, you feel much more certainty on the water when you throw your line in the water, don't you?
I do, Dale, but I think I do want to sort of put over that I don't want it to be said that I know what's here. I don't know what's here, but I have a degree of uncertainty, and obviously I think the positions that I've put out are equally plausible. And increasingly, on the balance, that maybe when we talked last time, it was a 50-50. Was Blanchflower right? Were these guys right? On the net, around the world, we're seeing a move to suggest it caused the recession is coming. But where is the debate and the discussion about the things that I have talked about? And if it's plausible, then they're plausibly wrong. And every single time, I do think we should say, okay, how do you know that? And is the opposite plausible? So, how do you know that the neutral rate of interest is 4? Why isn't it 0? Could it be 0? And each time someone says it in a speech, you put your hand up and you say, okay, you say it's 4, but could you exclude the possibility that it's 0? No. Thank you. Sit down.
Yeah. I always felt uncomfortable saying I don't know, but have found that there's wisdom in being aware of it and saying you don't know. And
exactly. And Dale, what you say is, I don't know. Here are the plausible outcomes. We'll see which way it goes. If this is right, then here, and if that's right, there. But that's not what they're doing, and that's what's got them into trouble, and that's what's got the market confused. Because then they have to say something else, and then they say something else, and the governor of the Bank of England has completely lost the plot. Nobody knows what to believe about what he said, because when he says it a week later, he'll say the opposite. So you just discount it and say they've no idea what they're doing, which is probably the right answer. And the likelihood is, if they think they know what they're doing, then the probability is they're going to do something wrong. So I just think we're in a world of macro error, Fed created recession, Bank of England being in a position. So, strikes are taking place. The governor of the Bank of England says workers have got to take pay cuts. So what has that done? Well, workers are going out on strike because they say, well, maybe the bosses who had huge payments and the shareholders have had big dividends. Maybe it's their turn. So now you said something, and what you've done is you've generated exactly the opposite by saying something that was silly.
Well, Danny, thanks so much for being here again, and and your work outstanding. And even though we're probably going to hit new lows in the happiness index, I'm pretty sure we aren't they? Being magnified by this.
Absolutely. So you're on my webpage. If people want to go there, there's lots of papers. If you click where it says journals, and you click other papers down, that we have lots of papers there. We have papers about showing that people are in distress. people are suffering because of the COVID crisis. The COVID crisis, exactly, there we are. There's the book, the book I had. If you go to journals, go back to the journals one, just a little up above it, click on that and you'll see there's lots of new papers. So papers on the economics of walking about and predicting unemployment and looking at COVID and mental health in America. This is about the fact that anxiety has risen dramatically. So people have suffered. They're very anxious about what's gone on to levels that we've not seen before. And so then all of a sudden you say, "Oh, we're going to impose these rate cuts." Well, people were much more anxious than they were in the past.
Yes.
And so the Psalm rule in predicting the Great Recession across countries. So this is about, do these central bankers know what they're doing? And the answer is, it turns out it's much better to ask people. You ask people, what do you think is going to happen to unemployment? Turns out that's much better than going to a Wall Street firm and asking them, "Tell us how you predict unemployment." Go and ask people. Turns out they know. So that's what this is about. And people beforehand will tell you a recession's coming, and my work tells you that you should believe them.
Excellent, Danny. And wisdom from the man on the street compared
Wisdom
to
of
the
crowd.
man in the palace. Wisdom of the crowd. That's right.
Absolutely. And what's interesting in this work, Dale, is that very often, if you go look at what firms are saying, so you look at business surveys, turns out the business surveys and consumer surveys track each other really well. Consumers know what their bosses are thinking. Consumers know what's happening in their local community. It turns out you go and look at these surveys of, they are PMIs and various
right.
Of those. It turns out they predict really well what's coming, much better than economic forecasters do. So take the wisdom of crowds. And if people say their confidence has collapsed and people think there's a recession coming, guess what?
Okay, and here's your review. There's a quick review from Anthony. "It's great to hear from somebody who gets it. Thank you, Dr. Blanchflower. That was great in the gloomiest way possible. LOL, fantastic interview."
Thank you so much, folks. Always enjoy coming on, and people write to me. My email's there. You can write to me. Have a look at these papers and this is about trying to understand how the real world works, rather than write down some little theory model and pretend you know. This is about go out there, ask people, look at how the world operates, and try and understand it. And that will inform share prices. It'll inform bond prices. It'll drive markets. If people's sentiment, if you understand sentiment, you understand outcomes.
It's great to have a voice like yours out there. You're a watchman over the central bankers. Really appreciate it.
That's what I try, and I get lots of grief.
Well, yeah. Then something you're saying is resonating when you get grief. So
can I tell you one thing to make you laugh? So when I was in the UK on the NPC, my daughter was there at the University of St Andrews, and one day she called me up and she said, "Daddy, it's awful. They're really going after you. Some guy has called you an idiot without a village." I feel like with you guys, I found myself a village.
Yeah, you got a couch with me, Danny, anytime.
All
right?
There you go. You're my village.
All right, buddy. Danny Blanchflower, everybody.
Thank you.
One and only. Thank you, Danny.
Sure. Bye.
Adios. And thank you, everyone, for being with us. And you could join the team in 10 minutes. That's a wrap. And what a great way to start off the day with Danny. Really appreciate his time and his views. And go check out.
I'm reading the comments; they're nice.
Yeah, and go to his website and learn.
You can email me. My email address is there. If you've got comments or want to ask me things, just email.
Yeah, I mean, how many people offer that? So there you go. His giving nature. You have questions, Danny will answer them. All right, that's a wrap, everyone. Don't just count your pips, count your blessings, and be kind to others and giving if you see fit. Adios, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Thanks again, Danny.
Yep.
Hey traders, this is Blake Morrow with ForexAnalytix. Thanks for stopping by our YouTube channel. Don't forget to like these videos, share them, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of the content that we provide here for free. Thanks for stopping by. I'll see you in the next video.